and then they entered the home. The responders noticed that the power was out in the home. There were no lights, and the whole thing was dark.
Despite the risk, Louise and Melissa followed the officers back upstairs to check on Melvin.
So they would have had flashlights looking around. They would have been making sure that the perpetrator was not there.
I remember sneaking back into the house as I was creeping up the stairs, and they kind of shined the light. I so happened to look to my left. And there I saw the glacial stare of my cousin. My mom saw Melvin, and she just lost it. And there was a high-pitched scream that curdled your blood. It just didn't seem real. It was an out-of-body experience that I felt that I was going through. That this was a horrible nightmare. Oh my God, what is going on?
Melissa Kuntz and her mother Louise have followed police into their pitch-black home, where they find 28-year-old Melvin Weathers stabbed.
His eyes was open and he's looking back at me, and he's dead.
Melvin was obviously dead with a knife sticking out of his chest.
They believe the killer is long gone. Thankfully, Louise and her daughters were not harmed, but the family dog is missing.
The puppy's name was Snow. He was a white dog. So the police officers, they immediately start looking around.
They need to get the power back on.
And the police asked my mom, where's the fuse box? And she told them that it was in the basement. I was holding on to the back of my mom's shirt for dear life as we was trying to maneuver through the house to go to the basement so that they could turn on the lights. The police officer noticed that the fuse box was tampered with, and the lights came on.
There in the basement, investigators discover how the killer entered the home.
We hear this rustling sound. We all look to see which direction the sound was coming from. That's when they noticed that the window was cut out. It was like, I remember the officer said, that's how he got in.
But where is the dog?
The police officers looked in the washing machine as well as the dryer. So then they finally discovered the freezer on the other side of the basement.
When officers opened the freezer,
my reaction to seeing the dog being pulled from the deep freezer, I was happy that he was alive.
they believe the intruder put the dog there to prevent it from barking and waking up the family. Upstairs, investigators find other bizarre evidence that shows the killer had planned carefully.
They find a pair of loafers that had sponges attached to the bottom, assumingly so that family couldn't hear noise as the perpetrator walked through the house. They were thinking that this could have been a home invasion or robbery that went wrong until they were able to look more closely at the evidence.
None of the drawers were pulled out as you would find in a standard robbery. There were no signs of anyone going through the drawers or closets and ransacking the place.
They also found a set of knives on the steps in the house.
Detectives also determined that the knives on the stairway were sourced from the kitchen right there.
In addition to the fatal knife wound in Melvin's heart, he'd been stabbed several times in the face and neck.
They also saw a pillow that was filled with blood, which led police to believe that that pillow was used to place over his face, try to smother him, possibly while he was being stabbed.
The intensity of stabbing a person in the chest, and also the idea that the power was off and that the phone line had been cut. It was more personal. It was a personal attack.
Given all the evidence that the police found that night, they pretty much assumed that they were working with a very calculated, dangerous individual who had premeditated to come into the house and kill the whole family.
To find out why, detectives asked Louise and her daughters to walk them through what happened that night.
On the day of the murder, we were in the bed asleep. I slept in a room with my mother. My sister had her own room. Melvin had his own room, and his door was closed. I heard Melvin call out my mother's name and could hear a struggle that was going on at the same time, and we all jumped up.
Louise tried to turn the lights on in the bedroom, and she immediately noticed that the lights would not come on. For a single mother of two, and the children waking up hearing muffled screams, that would be extremely terrifying.
I was afraid for my life at that moment, and I know I needed to get help. That's when me and my sister tried to go call the police. I recall my mother telling us, tell the police that someone died and they'll come quicker. So as we were saying this, we trying to get out the stairs. So you get down the first flight, and then it's a little corner, and you go down the second part. Right there, when we get to the second part of the stairs to go out the door, I see the shadow that's in front of me. And I could smell this stench.
Melissa says she instantly recognized the shadowy figure because she only knew one person who smelled like that. Her mother's ex-boyfriend, Bosco Lyles.
Bosco had this combination of his body odor and the cigarettes that he smoked. So I was able to say for sure that that was him. I felt like I was in a horror movie, like right before, the killer is right before you. And it's a paralyzing fear that you feel that at any moment, if he turned around, I'm dead.
For people living...
There are over 1.5 million home break-ins every year. A third of them happen at night while the residents are asleep.
For anyone who has experienced a home break-in, it is a paralyzing fear that you have. Is one that would make you feel disbelief that someone invaded your personal space, and to be able to dwell in your space is a fear that is indescribable.
Isn't surprised. She tells investigators he's been harassing the family since their breakup a few months ago.
William Lyles was known as Bosco. He was from Highland Park. He served in the armed forces, and he worked at Chrysler.
My mother was legally separated from my father, and she was going through a divorce. So she started dating Bosco right after he got out of the service. He presented himself as a family-loving man, someone who loved children, who loved to be around children. So she thought that this would be a great opportunity for her to find love again. My mom and dad divorce was finalized on September the 11th of 1978, and soon thereafter he moved in. He would do things like take us out on a picnic. We'll go to the movies, we'll go out and eat. I like to call that like the honeymoon phase.
But the honeymoon didn't last long.
He changed. He wasn't that little quiet person that came in that she thought was gonna be a big help. Bosco's real personality came out.
Before Bosco moved in, we had an open family relationship. You could talk, it was okay to laugh, it was okay to smile. You could have fun, you could play with your toys and do things like that. Once Bosco moved in, that dynamics changed completely. He had a vision of how he wanted a family life to be, and he expected us to conform to his way of thinking and acting and behaving. He was very much of a neat freak, control freak, and very much of a bully. He picked on people that he knew that he can get away with picking on.
He started demanding, I would say, the girls to do what he wanted and how he wanted to be done. And also, like for Louise, he demanded her paycheck.
Louise tells police Bosco also became increasingly abusive toward her.
He would push her, slap her, hit her with a fist, and he would demean her in front of the children and in front of other people.
And this is the kind of senseless abuse that she endured and that her children witnessed over the years of being with Bosco.
Louise invited her cousin Melvin to live with him, hoping his easygoing nature would help diffuse the tension.
He was not a big guy, he was not muscular, he was not a tough guy, but she felt that a male presence may serve as a deterrent.
Melvin was, how would I put it, was he timid, like a real peaceful type guy.
Melvin would take us out on walks just to get out the house and so we wouldn't be exposed to it, because Melvin was just as afraid of Bosco as what we were.
Louise explains to detectives that the situation continued to spiral out of control. Then one night, Bosco sexually assaulted her in front of her daughters.
We were in the den when it started off. My mom had the TV volume low and she was trying not to disturb him. He came downstairs and he was motioning for my mom to come upstairs with him. My mother said no. He picked her up and was trying to carry her up the stairs so that he could have sex with her. And my mother kept telling him no. She put her arms out to block herself from being able to go up the stairs. So he threw her on the living room floor. I ran upstairs to get my shoes so I could run out the house. When I came downstairs, what I saw was my mom had her hands over her face, but you could see the tears streaming from her eyes. She was laying on the floor in the living room. And he was trying to spread her legs. Now I saw this fireplace poker. And I struck him over the back. And it was like he turned around and I could have swore I saw Satan himself.
Melissa Coons tells police how when she witnessed Bosco Lyles trying to sexually assault her mother, Louise, she stopped the attack. At the time, authorities did little to help.
Back in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of laws to protect anyone against domestic violence. Police would come to the house and they would want to separate everybody, cool off for a period of time. And that was pretty much it.
Afterwards, her family took matters into their own hands.
When I shared everything with my grandmother that has happened, she was disgusted. She was outraged. She was furious.